Pulled over, harassed. A black woman stares down the hostile glare of a white cop ready to cuff her for merely existing near precinct headquarters. Moments later, the ultimate shock. Dr. Althea Washington isn't going to jail. She's being sworn in as his new captain. Feel the chilling tension, the sting of raw injustice, and the immense weight she now carries. Witness her lonely, courageous fight against deep-seated bias in a battle for the precinct's soul and the future of justice itself. Will she break or break the system? The Oak Haven dawn broke gray and grudging, spitting a miserable drizzle that slicked the asphalt and mirrored the mood inside patrol car 307. Officer Dave Miller nursed the dregs of his lukewarm coffee, the bitterness familiar on his tongue. 22 years on the force, most of them navigating these same streets, had etched lines of cynicism around his eyes and mouth. He'd seen it all, he liked to tell the rookies, though mostly what he'd seen confirmed his existing notions about the world. A world neatly divided into us and them. This morning, the us felt particularly beleaguered. Whispers had been slithering through the precinct for weeks about the new captain coming into the 3rd precinct. Not just any captain, but an outsider. A woman. And the detail dropped like a lead weight in the locker room. Black. Dr. Althea Washington. Doctor. Miller snorted, the sound sharp in the quiet car. Sounded like one of those academics, full of theories and procedures that looked good on paper but got cops killed on the street. Probably some diversity hire pushed through by the bleeding hearts downtown, eager to appease the latest round of protesters after the Henderson shooting last year. He adjusted his gun belt, the leather creaking. Oak Haven PD needed a firm hand, someone who understood the streets, not someone checking boxes. Someone like him, maybe, if things were fair. But things weren't fair. They were political. A call crackled over the radio, vague and routine. Unit 307. See the woman? Possible suspicious activity. Vicinity of precinct headquarters. Elm Street side. Caller reported someone loitering near parked vehicles. Miller grunted acknowledgement. Elm Street side. That was right near the main entrance. Probably just someone waiting for the building to open. But suspicious activity was a flexible friend. He swung the cruiser around the corner, wipers smearing the drizzle across the windshield. And there she was, standing beside a late-model sedan, dark gray, sensible. A black woman, dressed sharply in a charcoal pantsuit, crisp white blouse. She was looking towards the precinct building, then briefly checked her reflection in the car window, smoothing her already neat, short-cropped hair. Professional. Composed. Mid-40s, maybe. Miller slowed the car, his eyes narrowing. Loitering near parked vehicles. Technically true. But something else pricked at him, an incongruity he couldn't immediately name, but which triggered the familiar algorithm of suspicion honed over years. Wrong place, wrong time, or maybe just wrong person? He didn't recognize her. Not a lawyer he knew, not a city official he'd seen around. Too well-dressed for trouble, usually, but you never knew. Maybe casing the employee parking? He pulled the cruiser sharply to the curb, the tires hissing on the wet pavement, angling the car so the spotlight could illuminate her if needed. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the rhythmic tap of the rain. Althea Washington turned, startled by the abrupt arrival of the patrol car. She offered a tentative, polite half-smile. Years of navigating predominantly white spaces had taught her the necessity of appearing non-threatening, approachable, even when her heart rate kicked up a notch. She felt the familiar tension coiling in her stomach, a sensation she'd hoped, perhaps naively, might lessen once she wore the uniform herself. Miller swung out of the car, leaving the door ajar. He didn't return the smile. He hitched his belt again, a deliberate gesture of authority. "Morning, ma'am. Everything all right here?" His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "Good morning, officer," Althea replied, her voice steady, professional. She noted his posture, the way his hand hovered near his sidearm. Textbook intimidation, whether conscious or not. Yes, everything's fine. Just admiring the building. A slight exaggeration, but safer than explaining she was mentally preparing herself. Admiring the building? Miller echoed, skepticism dripping from the words. This is a restricted area. Employee parking mostly. You have business here. I do, Althea said calmly. I have an appointment inside. Appointment? Miller stepped closer, invading her personal space. He could smell a faint, pleasant scent. Lavender, maybe? It didn't fit his narrative. With who? What time? Althea felt a surge of indignation, but she clamped down on it. Arguing on the street, especially as a black woman facing a white officer exhibiting clear suspicion, was a dangerous game. My appointment is at 9, she said, keeping her tone even. I prefer not to discuss the details out here on the sidewalk. Miller's eyes flickered over her again, lingering on her suit, her polished shoes, the leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat of her car visible through the window. It wasn't adding up the way he wanted it to, but the initial script of suspicion was hard to abandon. Ma'am, I got a call about someone acting suspiciously around these vehicles. Need to see some identification. Althea sighed inwardly. Of course. Officer, I assure you, I work for the city. I'm expected. Everyone's expected somewhere, Miller retorted, his impatience growing. License and registration. Now, this was escalating precisely the way she'd counseled countless young people on how to avoid. Stay calm, comply, de-escalate. But the injustice grated. She was minutes away from being sworn in as captain in that very building. Officer, she tried again, lowering her voice slightly. Perhaps if you radioed in, you'd find my name on the schedule for the 9 o'clock ceremony? Miller scoffed. I'm not radioing dispatch to check on every person admiring the building. License and registration, ma'am, or I'm going to have to assume you're being deliberately obstructive. His hand moved decisively towards his hip. Althea took a slow breath. She could produce her driver's license. But she knew with a sickening certainty that wouldn't be the end of it. He'd run her name, find no warrants, but the humiliation, the assertion of dominance, would be complete. And if she showed him her old department ID, he might accuse her of impersonation. The absurdity was staggering. Officer, she said, her voice hardening slightly, losing its conciliatory edge. I think you are making a mistake. The only mistake, Miller countered, his face tightening, is you refusing a lawful order. Step out of the way, turn around, place your hands behind your back. He reached forward, his hand clamping firmly, possessively, on her upper arm. The shock of his touch, the rough certainty of it, sent a jolt through Althea. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was aggression. This was the very reason she had taken this job, moved across the country, entered the belly of a beast known for chewing up reformers. Take your hand off me, officer, she stated, her voice low and dangerous now, all pretense of politeness gone. You're resisting, Miller said, his grip tightening. He reached for his handcuffs. That's it. You're under arrest. Rain plastered strands of hair to Althea's forehead. The gray sky pressed down. In that moment, standing on the wet pavement under the hostile gaze of Officer Dave Miller, the full weight of the challenge ahead settled upon her, heavier than any badge she was about to wear. He was actually trying to arrest her, outside the building where she was about to become his commanding officer. The sheer, bitter irony of it almost made her laugh, but the cold reality of his grasp, the glint of the metal cuffs, choked the sound in her throat. Miller, what in God's name do you think you're doing? The voice, sharp and laced with authority, cut through the tense standoff. Both Althea and Miller turned towards the precinct entrance. Chief Frank Riley stood framed in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief and burgeoning anger. He'd been waiting near the entrance, anticipating Dr. Washington's arrival. He hadn't anticipated this. Miller instinctively released Althea's arm, straightening up, his expression shifting from aggression to confusion, then defensiveness. "Chief, sir, this woman was acting suspiciously, loitering near employee vehicles. Refused to provide ID, became argumentative." Chief Riley strode towards them, his polished shoes splashing through puddles, his gaze fixed not on Miller, but on Althea. His expression softened fractionally with recognition and profound embarrassment. "Dr. Washington," he said, his voice tight with apology. "I am so incredibly sorry. Please, accept my deepest apologies for this misunderstanding." Miller's jaw literally dropped. He stared at Althea, then back at the chief, then back at Althea again, the pieces clicking into place with agonizing slowness. Dr. Washington, the new captain, the black woman, the doctor, this sharply dressed woman he was about to cuff and stuff into his patrol car was his incoming boss. A cold dread, colder than the rain, washed over him. His face paled, then flushed a deep, mottled red. He felt suddenly horribly exposed, like his own ingrained biases were laid bare on the wet pavement for everyone to see. Althea met Chief Riley's gaze, her own expression composed, though her heart was still hammering against her ribs. She smoothed the sleeve of her jacket where Miller had gripped it. "Chief Riley," she acknowledged, her voice remarkably steady. "Good morning. It seems your officer was thorough in his patrol of the area." The subtle emphasis on thorough hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation. Riley shot Miller a look that could curdle milk. "Thorough," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Miller, get back in your vehicle. Report to Sergeant Davies in Internal Affairs immediately after your shift. We will be discussing your definition of suspicious activity and lawful orders in excruciating detail." Miller opened his mouth, then closed it again. Any protest died on his lips. He looked at Althea one last time, a confusing mix of fear, resentment, and utter humiliation churning within him. He mumbled a "yes, sir," turned stiffly, and retreated to his patrol car, the slam of the door echoing his shame. He didn't drive away immediately, just sat there, staring through the rain-streaked windshield, the world suddenly tilted on its axis. "Dr. Washington," Riley said, turning back to her, his face etched with mortification. "Again, I cannot apologize enough. This is inexcusable. Not the welcome I envisioned." "No," Althea agreed quietly. "I imagine it wasn't. But perhaps," she added, her gaze drifting towards Miller's car, then back to the imposing precinct building, "it was illuminating." Riley understood her meaning. This wasn't just one officer having a bad morning. This was a symptom of the very culture she was hired to change. He nodded grimly. "Let's get you inside, Captain." He stressed the title, a pointed reminder to any other officers who might be watching from the windows. The precinct briefing room buzzed with a low murmur of conversation. Rows of uniformed officers, male and female, black, white, and Latino, filled the chairs. The air smelled of coffee, damp uniforms, and anticipation. At precisely 0900 hours, Chief Riley stepped up to the podium. "All right, settle down," he commanded, his voice regaining its usual authority. He cleared his throat. "As you all know, today marks a significant transition for the 3rd Precinct. We're welcoming a new commanding officer, Captain Althea Washington." He gestured towards the side, and Althea walked purposefully to the podium. A ripple of varied reactions went through the room. Some officers offered polite applause, others watched with neutral expressions, a few exchanged guarded glances. Miller, conspicuously present in the back row as ordered, stared fixedly at the floor, his face still burning. Officer Lena Petrova, a young, sharp officer often critical of the department's old guard, watched Althea with open curiosity and a flicker of hope. Sergeant Marcus Jones, a veteran black officer who had seen many reform efforts come and go, observed with a stoic, unreadable expression. Althea stood tall at the podium, her presence commanding despite her average height. She surveyed the room, her gaze steady, meeting the eyes of officer after officer. She didn't mention the incident outside. It wasn't the time or place for personal grievances. Her focus was larger. "Thank you, Chief Riley," she began, her voice clear and resonant, easily filling the room. "Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, to join the ranks of the Oak Haven Police Department, and specifically, to lead the 3rd Precinct." She paused, letting her words settle. "I come to this role with a doctorate in criminology, 15 years of experience in urban policing, focusing on community engagement and procedural justice, and a deep commitment to the principles of fairness, accountability, and transparency." She saw a few subtle shifts, a raised eyebrow here, a skeptical tightening of lips there. Miller risked a glance upwards, his expression sullen. "I understand that change can be met with uncertainty," Althea continued, her tone direct but not confrontational. "I'm not here to dismantle traditions wholesale, but I am here to ensure that our practices align with the highest ethical standards and reflect the diverse community we serve. We will uphold the law vigorously and effectively, but we will do so constitutionally, respectfully, and with a constant awareness of the impact our actions have on the lives of the people of Oak Haven. My door will be open," she stated firmly. "I expect professionalism. I demand integrity, and I promise to listen to your concerns, to your ideas, and most importantly, to the community we are sworn to protect. We will focus on de-escalation, on building trust, and on reducing disparities in our enforcement actions. Accountability will be paramount for everyone, starting with myself." She concluded, "Policing is a difficult, demanding profession. It requires courage, compassion, and a commitment to justice. I look forward to working alongside each of you as we strive to make the 3rd Precinct a model of effective, equitable policing. Thank you." A wave of formal applause followed, more sustained this time, though the underlying currents of skepticism and resistance were palpable. Chief Riley administered the oath of office, Althea's right hand raised, her left steady on the Bible, her voice unwavering as she swore to uphold the Constitution and serve the city. As the chief pinned the captain's bars onto her collar, Althea felt the tangible weight of the medal, a physical manifestation of the immense responsibility she now carried. Her eyes scanned the room again, briefly meeting Sergeant Jones's gaze. He gave her a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. Then her eyes found Miller in the back row. He was looking right at her now, his expression a volatile cocktail of resentment and disbelief. The ceremony was over. The real work was just beginning. And standing there, officially Captain Althea Washington, she knew the encounter that morning wasn't just an unfortunate incident. It was the first shot fired in a battle for the soul of the precinct. The first week felt like wading through molasses. Captain Althea Washington's office, sparsely decorated but organized with crisp efficiency, became the nerve center of the 3rd Precinct. But the signals she sent out often seemed to get lost in transit, distorted by static or deliberate interference. She started with the basics, introducing herself during roll calls, walking the precinct floors, attempting brief conversations. Some officers were professionally courteous, if reserved. Others, particularly the older guard loyal to the previous captain, offered monosyllabic answers and averted gazes. Miller was a ghost, making himself scarce whenever she was near. His reports filed meticulously, almost too perfectly, as if daring her to find fault. He'd received a formal reprimand for the incident outside, logged in his file, but Chief Riley, wary of provoking open rebellion so early in Althea's tenure, hadn't pushed for suspension. Miller knew it, and the lack of harsher consequences seemed only to fuel his simmering resentment. Althea heard the whispers, the coded complaints filtering back through Sergeant Jones, who had cautiously positioned himself as an unofficial conduit. They're calling the new procedural justice memos Washington's weekly wisdom, he reported Drilly one afternoon, leaning against her office doorframe. Lots of eye-rolling about the de-escalation training modules. Miller's been particularly vocal in the locker room. Affirmative action hire. Doesn't know real police work. The usual garbage. Althea leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Let them talk, Sergeant. It's the actions I'm watching. Just giving you the lay of the land, Captain, Jones said, his expression impassive. Forewarned is forearmed. I appreciate it, Marcus, she said, using his first name deliberately. More than you know. A flicker of something, respect, maybe solidarity, crossed Jones's face before vanishing. Be careful who you trust, Captain. Not everyone smiling to your face is on your side. Her first significant initiative was a data-driven review of traffic stops and pedestrian checks over the past year. She wanted hard numbers on racial disparities, locations, and outcomes. The request was met with bureaucratic inertia. Files were suddenly hard to locate. Database searches yielded incomplete results. Officers claimed their logs were in storage. Its pushback, plain and simple. Officer Lena Petrova volunteered quietly one evening, lingering after a briefing. Petrova, sharp and observant, had made a point of being helpful, offering concise reports and asking intelligent questions about the new directives. Sergeant Collins in records? He's Miller's fishing buddy. He's slow-walking your request. Althea looked at Petrova, evaluating her. Young, ambitious, seemed genuinely committed to reform. And potential ally, but Jones's warning echoed. Thank you for the insight, Officer Petrova. I expect my officers to follow lawful directives, regardless of their personal feelings or fishing buddies. Yes, Captain, Petrova said. But some of them think the old ways were better. Easier. Easier for whom, officer? Althea asked pointedly. Petrova met her gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. Exactly, Captain. Althea decided on a direct approach. She scheduled a meeting with Sergeant Collins, presenting him with a formal, written order for the data, specifying a deadline. She remained calm, professional, but left no room for interpretation. The data began to trickle in slowly, grudgingly. Meanwhile, microaggressions became a daily annoyance. Being mistaken for a secretary, having her directives questioned in ways her male predecessors never experienced, enduring condescending explanations of basic police procedures. Each instance was small, deniable, but cumulatively, they formed a pattern of disrespect designed to undermine her authority. One afternoon, reviewing use of force reports, she came across an incident involving Miller. A resisting arrest charge during a noise complaint call in a predominantly black neighborhood. The narrative was standard. Subject became belligerent, refused commands, minor force used to gain compliance. But the body cam footage request form attached was marked camera malfunction, battery died. Althea frowned. Convenient. She pulled Miller's file. A pattern emerged, several prior complaints of excessive force, particularly in minority neighborhoods, none sustained, and a statistically improbable number of camera malfunctions during contentious arrests. She summoned Miller to her office. He stood rigidly before her desk, refusing to sit, his expression defiant. "Officer Miller," Althea began, keeping her voice neutral. "I'm reviewing your use of force report from the Henderson Street call last Tuesday." "Yes, Captain." His tone bordered on insolent. "The report states your body camera malfunctioned. Battery died, Captain. Happens sometimes." His gaze flickered away, then back, challenging her. "It seems to happen to you more frequently than to other officers during physical arrests, Officer Miller. Especially when complaints are likely." Miller stiffened. "Are you accusing me of something, Captain?" "I'm observing a pattern," Althea replied evenly. "And I'm informing you that equipment maintenance, including ensuring your camera is charged and functional before each shift, is your responsibility. Future malfunctions during critical incidents will be subject to intense scrutiny and potential disciplinary action. Is that understood?" Miller's jaw clenched. He saw the warning for what it was. She was watching him closely. The humiliation of the first day curdled into outright animosity. She wasn't just an outsider. She was actively targeting him, looking for ways to push him out. "Understood, Captain," he clipped out, the words tight with suppressed anger. "Dismissed," Althea said, turning her attention back to the files on her desk, though she felt his hostile gaze on her for a long moment before he turned and left, the click of the closing door unnaturally loud in the quiet office. She leaned back, letting out a slow breath. This was just the beginning. Pulling that thread, the body camera issue, was necessary, but she knew it would provoke further resistance. The first ripples of change were spreading, and the undercurrents of opposition were getting stronger. She had drawn a line on accountability. Now she had to hold it. The precinct settled into a tense state of watchful waiting. Althea's directive about body camera functionality caused a stir. Suddenly, batteries were meticulously charged, and officers double-checked recordings. But the resistance simply shifted, becoming more insidious. Passive aggression became the weapon of choice. Reports were filed late. Minor procedural corners were cut in ways that were hard to pin down but slowed things down, and a chill descended upon interactions with officers loyal to Miller and the old ways. Miller himself became a master of malicious compliance. He followed every new directive to the absolute letter, often interpreting them in the most literal, inefficient way possible, seemingly designed to highlight their perceived absurdity. He'd spend excessive time on de-escalation dialogues during routine stops, causing delays, then subtly blame the new protocols when questioned. He filed a grievance alleging harassment, citing Althea's scrutiny of his body camera record as evidence of personal bias stemming from their initial encounter. The grievance was thin, but it served its purpose, forcing Althea and the chief to expend time and energy responding, creating administrative drag. The pressure mounted on Althea. The long hours, the constant vigilance, the feeling of being perpetually under a microscope took their toll. There were moments, late at night in her quiet apartment, where doubt crept in. Was she making a difference, or just banging her head against a brick wall? The isolation felt profound. She was the boss, yes, but she was also an outsider, a black woman in a space deeply suspicious of both. But resilience was woven into her DNA. She'd faced down biased professors in academia, navigated skepticism in her previous department, and drawn strength from her family's history of fighting for civil rights. She remembered her grandfather's words, "Change doesn't happen because it's easy. It happens because it's necessary, and because someone has the courage to keep pushing when everyone else wants to quit." She found pockets of support. Officer Petrova became bolder, discreetly passing along information about officers deliberately misinterpreting directives or complaining about the PC nonsense. "They're testing you, Captain," Petrova said during one quiet conversation near the coffee machine, "waiting for you to slip up or back down." Sergeant Jones offered gruff, practical advice. Focus on the wins you can get, he advised. Build alliances outside the department. You need community support to weather the storm inside. Heeding his advice, Althea prioritized community outreach. She attended neighborhood watch meetings, met with local pastors and activists, including the respected Reverend Davis from the Oak Haven Community Coalition. Initially wary, having seen many promises from police leadership evaporate, Reverend Davis slowly began to see Althea's genuine commitment. People are tired of talk, Captain Washington, he told her during a meeting in his church office, surrounded by photos of community gatherings and civil rights marches. They need to see action. Accountability. That's what I'm working towards, Reverend, Althea assured him. But changing institutional culture, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We've been running this marathon for generations, Captain, Davis replied gently, but firmly. We need to see some progress towards the finish line. The test Althea knew was coming arrived on a humid Friday night. A distressed 911 call reported a domestic dispute escalating at an apartment complex known for frequent police calls. Miller and his partner were the first responders. Althea, monitoring the radio traffic from her office while catching up on paperwork, felt a prickle of unease. Minutes later, the radio crackled again. Shots fired. Officer needs assistance. Repeat. Shots fired. Althea's blood ran cold. She grabbed her radio, authorizing backup, and headed towards the scene herself, sirens wailing through the night. She arrived to chaos. Multiple patrol cars, flashing lights painting the scene in strobes of red and blue. Paramedics were working on a young black man lying on the pavement outside an apartment building, while a distraught woman sobbed nearby. Miller stood a short distance away, his gun holstered, talking animatedly to another officer. His partner appeared shaken but unharmed. Althea took charge immediately, securing the scene, assigning officers to canvass for witnesses, ensuring the injured man received aid, and separating Miller for an initial statement. Miller's story was clipped, defensive. Subject came out wild, ignored commands, lunged at my partner, had something shiny in his hand. I thought it was a weapon. I fired. What was the shiny object? Althea asked, her voice calm but firm. Miller hesitated. Turned out it was his keys. Althea felt a wave of nausea. Keys. The man was shot because he was holding keys. She looked at the sobbing woman, his girlfriend, apparently, and the paramedics loading the young man onto a stretcher. His condition looked critical. Secure Officer Miller's firearm, Althea commanded another supervisor. Place him on administrative leave, effective immediately. Full investigation protocols initiated. Miller stared at her, aghast. Admin leave? Captain, I followed procedure. I feared for my partner's life. That will be determined by the investigation, officer, Althea said, her gaze unwavering. Including a thorough review of your body cam footage. This time, she knew there would be no convenient malfunction. She had personally overseen the implementation of automatic cloud uploading for critical incidents. The resistance now had a flashpoint. Miller wasn't just being scrutinized. He was sidelined after a shooting, an action many officers saw as premature judgment, a betrayal of the blue line. The precinct buzzed with anger and fear. Miller became a martyr in the eyes of the resistant faction. Althea stood firm. She addressed the precinct during the next roll call, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation but reiterating the non-negotiable need for transparency and accountability. She met with Reverend Davis and other community leaders, assuring them of a thorough, impartial investigation. The pressure intensified. Anonymous threats appeared online. Union representatives shadowed her meetings. But something else happened too. Officers like Petrova quietly voiced their support for the impartial process. Sergeant Jones nodded grimly, "You did what you had to do, Captain. Right thing's rarely the easy thing." Community members, while demanding justice, acknowledged Althea's swift, transparent response as a departure from the past. She was weathering the storm, battered but not broken. The shooting was a tragedy, a stark reminder of the stakes. But her handling of it, her refusal to bow to internal pressure or circle the wagons, sent a clear message. Under Captain Althea Washington, the old rules no longer applied. Resilience wasn't just about enduring. It was about pushing forward, even when the path was fraught with peril. The investigation into the shooting was painstaking and politically charged. The body cam footage was crucial. It showed the young man, agitated and shouting after the argument, rushing out of the apartment door towards the officers. He did have keys clutched in his hand, glinting under the porch light. He didn't explicitly lunge, but moved quickly, erratically. Miller shouted commands, yes, but the time between his final command and firing his weapon was fractions of a second, arguably too fast, indicating a potential failure to properly assess the threat or attempt further de-escalation as mandated by Althea's recent directives. The district attorney ultimately declined to file criminal charges against Miller, citing the chaotic situation and the reasonable officer standard, however contentious. But the internal investigation, spearheaded by Althea and reviewed by Chief Riley and a civilian oversight board Althea had championed, found significant policy violations. Miller had failed to adequately de-escalate, his reaction time suggested insufficient threat assessment, and his history of complaints and prior camera malfunctions painted a troubling picture. The disciplinary recommendation was severe: termination. The police union fought it tooth and nail, appealing the decision, painting Miller as a victim of political correctness and reverse discrimination. The battle dragged through arbitration, consuming resources and keeping tensions high. In the end, a compromise was reached. Miller wasn't terminated, but accepted a significant suspension without pay, mandatory retraining focused on bias and de-escalation, and reassignment to a desk job, permanently removed from patrol duties. It wasn't the clean break Althea had hoped for, but it was a consequence. A real, tangible consequence that sent shockwaves through the department. Miller, the symbol of the old guard, had faced accountability. He remained on the force, a sullen presence behind a records counter, a constant, visible reminder that actions have repercussions, even if the system still grounds slowly. In the months that followed, the atmosphere in the 3rd Precinct began to subtly shift. The overt resistance faded, replaced by a grudging acceptance among some and genuine engagement among others. The mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training, initially met with cynicism, started to resonate with younger officers like Petrova, who saw its practical application. She began leading informal peer discussions about challenging calls, incorporating the new techniques. Althea continued her community outreach, and slowly, tentatively, trust began to build. Complaint numbers started a slow decline, and community cooperation on investigations saw a slight uptick. Reverend Davis publicly acknowledged the department's efforts under her leadership, stressing that while much work remained, the direction was positive. Sergeant Jones allowed himself a rare, almost imperceptible smile one afternoon after a particularly productive community meeting Althea had led. "Didn't think I'd see the day," he admitted quietly to her afterwards. "Folks actually talking with the police instead of at them. It's a start, Marcus," Althea said, the weariness still evident in her eyes, but now tinged with cautious optimism. Just a start. She knew the fight wasn't over. Systemic racism wasn't dismantled by one captain, one investigation, or one policy change. It was deeply entrenched, woven into the fabric of institutions and attitudes. Miller, shuffling papers behind a counter, was proof that the roots ran deep. There would be setbacks, new challenges, moments where the weight felt unbearable. But as she walked through the precinct one evening, She saw Officer Petrova patiently talking a newly arrived immigrant family through the process of filing a stolen property report, using translated pamphlets Althea had implemented. She overheard two veteran officers discussing how a verbal de-escalation tactic had defused a potentially violent domestic call the night before, a tactic they'd initially scoffed at in training. These weren't headlines. They weren't dramatic confrontations. They were small, vital seeds of change taking root in the hard soil of the precinct. Later, standing at her office window, looking out at the Oakhaven skyline as dusk settled, Althea reflected on the journey. The ugly confrontation with Miller on that first rainy morning felt like a lifetime ago. It had been an ordeal, humiliating and infuriating, but it had also stripped away any illusions about the task ahead. It had forged her resolve in fire. The weight of the badge, the weight of expectation, the weight of history. It was still heavy, but it no longer felt like a burden crushing her. It felt like a responsibility she was strong enough to carry. Change was slow, painful, and often resisted with fierce determination. But it was possible. It happened in the data reviewed, the policies rewritten, the training implemented, the conversations started, the trust tentatively rebuilt. It happened because someone was willing to stand firm, demand accountability, and believe, against all odds, in the possibility of a more just future, one difficult day, one courageous decision at a time. The work continued, the marathon stretched ahead, but for the first time in a long time within the walls of the 3rd precinct, the finish line, however distant, seemed achievable.